And welcome to Second Opinion Radio on WRFG. I'm Melody Paris. I'm your host this evening. So happy to be here with you. I hope you're having a great day wherever you are. We have a wonderful show lined up for you tonight. We have actually two guests joining us tonight. We have a special guest joining us here in the studio, and we have a guest joining us by phone. Of course, we also have our co-host, Dr. Carrie Packwood Freeman. She's a professor at Georgia State University. Her specialty is animals in the media and also an author. Hi, Carrie.
Hey, Melody. Hey, everyone.
And Carrie, you're going to be joining in here with us and also coming back a little bit later in the show to tell us some important information about some legislation.
That's right.
That's right. And this is our marathon. So if you're familiar with the show, we do this a couple of times a year. So tonight we're kicking off our spring marathon. We'll be talking about that all along the way. But this is a time when we ask you, our listeners, to join us in our mission, and that is community radio and empowering you to get the information that you would never get on commercial stations. So tonight we're asking you to support us. As you're listening, feel free to call in. Pledge your support. It is tax deductible at 404-523-8989 at any point. Carrie's going to be answering the phone. She's multitasking tonight. You can also always pledge online at WRFG.org, and your pledges are what keep us here on the air. So thank you for tuning in tonight. Let's get right to it. As I mentioned, we have a special guest joining us here in the studio, Diana Young. She is a local animal advocate. Her mission is to save Lolita. And she's going to tell us who Lolita is. She's going to tell us all about it and what we can do to help. So let me welcome you, Diana. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Actually, it's Diana Taylor.
Oh, did I say Diana Young? Who's Diana Young?
I look so young. Yes,
oh, my gosh.
That's it.
Why did I say young?
Because I look young. Let's just put it out there.
Goodness.
Let's put it out there for all the single guys.
Yeah.
I look young.
Everyone's going to have to trust us here on radio. How
Oh,
great we look here.
Absolutely.
I know why I said that. I'll tell you later off here. Remember what I said about live radio? We're going to keep it rolling. Diana Taylor, sorry about that, and well-known animal advocate here in Atlanta, passionate about saving Lolita. Diana, tell us a little bit about you.
About me?
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I originally from New Jersey. I've been here in Atlanta since probably about 30 or more years.
Mm-hmm.
And I became very passionate about this issue. It's interesting. I went down to the Miracle March for Lolita that was down in Miami, Florida, and that was back in January. And a gentleman who was also interviewing down there, he said to me, he said, you know, what do you say to people who don't care about this issue? And I told him, I said, I don't think that people don't care. I said, I think they don't know.
Right.
And for me, once you know, and once you know what's going on with the dolphins and whales and actually our entire oceans,
Mm-hmm.
you're sometimes like I have been, and you're compelled to just get involved, and that's what involved me with with Lolita and her plight and trying to call attention to it. So I often say, once you know, you don't go.
Oh, that's a great saying. Who is Lolita for people who may not even be aware?
Well, Lolita is actually an orca, and they're also known as killer whales.
Mm-hmm.
And Lolita is actually referred to as the world's loneliest orca. And that's because she's been in captivity at the Miami Sea Aquarium for more than 44 years.
Wow.
She's actually in the smallest tank in North America in one of the oldest marine facilities in the country.
Right. And, I know when you say the smallest tank, people they don't really have a visual reference to that. And so I will say to people, if you're interested in knowing what a small tank is, go online. I know you're going to give the website out, Diana, but when you say small tank, these are magnificent, smart, magnificent animals who would probably swim hundreds of miles a day.
Do. Mm-hmm.
That tank is tiny. It barely looks like it fits her body. It's so small.
I'll tell you, Melody, her tank is not only small, it's actually illegal. And her tank is so small that it violates the Animal Welfare Act.
Wow.
However, the USDA, who's responsible for enacting and prosecuting for their laws, has done nothing in this situation for more than the 44 years that she's there. And to give you an idea, Lolita's tank is actually smaller than my backyard.
Wow.
And I don't have a big backyard. And
Wow.
sometimes I look out in my yard and I see my Great Danes playing, and I think, wow, I mean, I could have an orca back here. You know, it boggles my mind, you know, when you start to look at it like that. And to actually put it in perspective for the listeners, her tank is only about 1.5 times the length that she is. And you're right,
gosh.
orcas in the wild swim more than 100 miles a day. They also dive to depths of 300. Some of them have been known to dive up to 1,000 feet. Lolita, to get the distance in her tank that she would get in the wild, she would have to go back and forth in her tank more than 6,000 times.
Oh my God. I have never heard that. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's incredible. And I'm sure you've heard about the whale Tilikum.
Yes.
Tilikum is actually in SeaWorld, and Tilikum is one of the largest orcas that's in captivity now. He's also the orca that's responsible for the deaths of 3 trainers at SeaWorld. But it has been said that for the adequate size tank for Tilikum would have to be the size of Rhode Island.
Wow.
So that also puts it in perspective for you.
That is amazing. And I mean, it's just heartbreaking to hear it. How did Lolita end up there? That's a really interesting story. Sad, but people need to understand that.
Yes, definitely. Now, Lolita is part of the southern resident killer whale population, and so by the residents, I mean they're not like the open ocean orcas that are swimming out in the open ocean, nor are they the transients that kind of come and go. Basically, when we say resident, these orcas spend the majority of their time in the waters off Washington State. So in the 1970s, it became very popular to have these marine parks. And so that's the place where a lot of these hunters came to capture the majority of these orcas. And Lolita was rounded up in what's now called the Penn Cove captures. And if anyone's interested, they can Google Penn Cove captures online, and you'll actually see actual pictures of Lolita's capture. And basically what happened is that men would come in speedboats, and they would use explosives. And they would actually light bombs and throw explosives into the water to chase these orcas into these inlets. And then they would use nets and harpoons to separate the males who would be protecting the pod. And then they would gather the females and the babies into the small inlet, eventually separate the babies from their mothers, and then they would take the babies and the juveniles. And Lolita was captured along with 80 other orcas, and I would say that a third of the youngsters that were selected for captivity, they died because they tried to go through the nets and reach their mothers, and they got tangled up. 7 survived, and one of them was Lolita, and she ended up being sold to the Miami Seaquarium for $8,000. That was back in 1970.
And I will say, like you said, you can go online and see that. And I did it today. As I told you before we started the show, I had to reapply my makeup. It's so heartbreaking because you can actually see close-ups of her face. And there was things on there that said, like, here's her, here's the last time she ever saw her mother. Here's the last time she ever saw the ocean. You can look into her eyes. And so she's been in there 44 years. Is she alone, or?
That's actually that's actually one of the huge issues with her being in captivity. There's many violations with the Miami Seaquarium, and we don't even have a long enough show to go through all of their violations.
Right.
But one of the issues with her being in captivity is that she is supposed to be housed with a companion from her own species. Now, there are 2, I believe they're white-sided dolphins in an enclosure next to her, but she has no other orca, and I'll tell you why. When Miami Seaquarium captured her, there was another orca in that small tank. So imagine now I got 2 orcas in my backyard.
Oh my God.
Okay? Now I got 2 orcas in my backyard, and one of the other orcas is Hugo. And it turns out that Hugo was from Lolita's pod. And the reason that they knew that, well, actually, they didn't know it at that time. We knew it because each pod has their own language. They call each other by their own names.
Wow.
They are very much like us. They're very intelligent.
Right.
Hugo and Lolita started talking to each other, and Hugo began to ram the tank until he broke it. and he almost drowned. He was so desperate to be with Lolita. That's how social these creatures are. And so he ended up getting in her tank, and they were doing their shows and everything like that. Well, he did not do well in captivity, and he continued to ram his head against the side of his tank until he died of an aneurysm, at which time Miami Seaquarium promptly dumped him in the Miami-Dade landfill.
Heartbreaking. But the thing is, Diana, this is this whole captivity issue, I guess, is really the crux of this. These animals don't belong in captivity, and they don't thrive in captivity, as we've seen.
And that's such the phrase where they say captivity kills.
Yeah.
And there's so many issues with that. There's the space requirements. Like we said, her tank is very, very small. There's the need for the social companionship. These pods stay together, including the males. They stay together for life. And then there's also the issue where she's exposed to the elements. Her entire tank is exposed to the sun. And she does not have any shade. And all these are laws. These aren't things that in a dream world we would like to have happen.
Right.
These are laws that have been enacted to protect these animals that are not being enforced and are not being penalized. And so that's one of the situations where we're trying to get the authorities to actually act instead of constantly renewing the Miami Seaquarium's permit to have this orca year after year after year.
Now, one of the things that just happened in January was the Miracle March for Lolita. So obviously the word is getting out. People worldwide, I think I saw signs from all over the world, people came to march for her. So what has been the response? I mean, where do you see this going? Because the pressure must be on, right?
The pressure is on. I was actually at the Miracle March for Lolita, and not only did they have the Miracle March for Lolita, which about 1,500 people came to Miami, there were also sister marches that were held around the country, everywhere from Seattle and that Washington State area where Lolita is from, to London, to several different cities, to San Diego, to other different cities. So the word is getting out there. They also have weekend protest at the Miami Seaquarium every Saturday and Sunday from noon to 12. From noon to 2. And groups out there, they turn away tons of cars. As I said, once people know, they don't go.
Right.
And so they educate people as they're coming into the Seaquarium, and they turn it around. They turn those cars around. So there's a lot that is being done to help Lolita. She was the result of that huge march and all these other efforts and the more than 30 years of demonstrations for this orca has been that in 2005, her pod was declared endangered. And part of the reason is, ecological reasons within that area, like pollution and the lack of fishing and such. However, one of the huge reasons why her pod is declared endangered is because those captures that I talked about, the Penn Cove captures, they took away almost 70% of the population, and they took the babies and they took the juveniles. And so these animals are, although SeaWorld and such may impregnate their orcas at 4 years old, orcas in the wild don't get mature until they're about 15. So it's a slow process, and this pod has been slow to recover. Lolita was exempt from that because she was in captivity. Well, part of the march and part of the interest has caused her to be declared endangered last month. So she is now part of her endangered pod, and it now remains to be seen what that means. She's supposed to be free from harm and harassment.
Right.
But now the courts have to decide, what does harm and harassment mean? Does it mean they can't ride her? Does it mean she can't be shown? Does it mean she needs to be moved? Does it mean that they need to turn her over for this comprehensive retirement plan that's in place for her?
If you are just tuning in, you are listening to Second Opinion Radio on WRFG 89.3 FM Atlanta. We have the pleasure of speaking with Diana Taylor. She's on the forefront of trying to free Lolita. As we've been hearing, Lolita has been captive for 44 years in the Miami Seaquarium. So let's get to the part about what are animal advocates asking for? What do you want them to do with her, and what do you see happening? I mean, how do you see this playing out?
Well, it's interesting because Ironically, the first orcas that were on display in 1861 by P.T. Barnum of Barnum and Bailey Circus.
Our least favorite person ever.
So we just find out, of course, if you were watching the news this week, that they've decided to retire their elephants.
Right.
And so it's interesting that the same people who started out with this whole they were doing beluga whales back then. But showing whales have retired their elephants, and now we want this community, the marine mammal community, to follow suit and do the same. There is a comprehensive retirement plan already in place for Lolita. You can find that retirement plan on orcanetwork.org. It has not been developed by us, by general people like myself. It's been developed by marine biologists, scientists, and such. And it calls for Lolita to be retired. She's earned this. It's called for her to be retired to a sea pen in the Puget Sound, in her home waters, okay?
Yes.
And then when she goes to the sea pen, she would be rehabilitated. And a lot of people write in on the comments, she's going to die in the wild, they get so upset. The plan is not to immediately release her into the wild. She would be rehabilitated, possibly for months. Her release depends on her. So she would have everything from having to learn how to catch live fish again, because right now she's fed frozen fish, which is not her normal diet. She would be able to swim while her current tank is about 75 feet. The sea pen is 900 feet.
Wow.
She'll be able to feel the ocean currents on her. And more importantly, she'll be able to communicate with her family.
Because they're still alive.
Her mother is still alive.
Wow.
Her mother is Ocean's son,
who's
still alive. They think she's about 82 years old. Granny is also in that pod, and Granny's 102.
Wow.
So in the rehabilitation plan, she'd also be taken on walks. Just like I take my dogs for a walk, they would take Lolita for a walk. She would follow a boat. She would get her stamina up and such. And depending on how she responds to rehabilitation, she would either be able to, and how her pod responds to her as well, she would either be able to be released into the wild with her pod with a station available that feeding or whatever, that if she ever needed to come back, if she ever needed to have the human companionship, if she ever needed any kind of veterinary care, she would be coming back to that station. That would be available to her 24/7. If she is not able to be released in the wild due to her length of captivity, she would be cared for in this pen for the rest of her life, which is much more humane than living in a bathtub.
Right. And in solitary confinement.
In solitary confinement, yeah.
Wow. And so all of this has already been thought out, planned out, and funded.
Yes. The Orca Network has the plan. I don't know that it is 100% funded. I do know that there are a lot of things that they are waiting on. Once they get the go from the Miami Seaquarium, which has now been purchased by Palace Entertainment, once they get the go from them, that they would release Lolita. And again, that's going to require some court intervention.
And
then all these things will go into place.
Oh, yeah. And there are so many people, so many very, very rich, powerful, compassionate people. I have no doubt if they will release her, it will happen.
I hope so. They've actually, there's been a lot of offers made to Arthur Hertz, who used to own the Miami Seaquarium. He was offered everything from $1 million for Lolita to $8 million. He's offered movie rights for any movie that's been made for her. He's been offered gate proceeds if she's moved to Washington State and people come to see her. He's also been offered that for them to build an IMAX theater at the Miami Seaquarium with video feeds to Lolita.
Wow.
So people can actually swim live with Lolita.
Yeah.
Up to this point, he has declined. He prefers to see Lolita in the tank.
Wow. Well, we know that you won't stop. We know that we certainly won't stop talking about it here. And so many passionate people, this has to happen. But, how do people, we've got a couple of minutes here, how do people who are listening tonight, how do they help? How do they get involved?
Well, the most important thing that people can do is don't buy a ticket.
Right.
When you buy a ticket to marine parks, and I'm not talking about like an aquarium just has fish. I'm talking about where they have marine mammals. They have dolphins. They have whales. In fact, orcas are dolphins. Don't buy a ticket because you're supporting this captivity. You're supporting a shortened life for these animals. They're not happy where they are. And science has proven that. That's just not me emotionally saying it. It has been proven. So don't buy a ticket. If you're on a cruise, don't swim with dolphins.
Right.
See these animals in the wild.
Right.
Go on a wild, whale watching. I've been on one, and it's what you see in the wild is nothing like what you see of these animals in captivity. If you're in captivity, they're sometimes taking mothers from their nursing babies so that they can swim with you. You don't want that. Swim with them in the wild where it's their choice to decide what they want to do. And the other thing that you can do, and I tell people this all the time, is just educate yourself. The information's out there. Look up the Penn Cove captures. Go on the Facebook page for Miracle March for Lolita. Visit the Orca Network and look at the retirement plan, and then make your decisions. Watch Blackfish. It's all that information is out there for free for folks. And I also tell folks, if you're in the Miami area, join the protest if you're interested. They always need people out there. They've got extra signs. Go out there with your friends, with your dogs, and join and be a voice. Be a voice for Lolita and all the other captives.
Fantastic. Again, orcanetwork.org. That's Diana Taylor, and we thank you so much for everything you're doing and for the education. I think you hit the nail on the head with don't buy a ticket, and also educate yourself and your family and friends. Thank you so much, Diana. Don't go away. Mm-hmm. We're going to switch gears. We're not going to change topics totally, but we're going to stay on the captivity marine animal issue, and we're going to bring into the discussion Martha Brock. She's a